she received a letter from a notary public her husband, who had died a few weeks earlier, had left her a house built right into the rock. She didn't know that within its walls lay a secret he had kept his entire life. When she went inside, the stone seemed to begin breathing. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. Rain fell softly over the coastal town, sliding down the glass of the library windows, where Laura Harper sat behind the desk. The rhythmic patter had always soothed her, yet today it felt heavier, almost intrusive. At 45, she had grown accustomed to silence, the kind that comes after years of working quietly, raising a child alone, and no longer expecting surprises. Her life had become a collection of small, predictable rituals: a cup of coffee at dawn, a walk with her son to school, the same grocery store clerk greeting her on Thursdays. It was safe, modest, and, at times, unbearably still. Her son Eli, 8 years old and endlessly curious, had inherited his late father's restless eyes. He often asked about the man in the framed photo on the shelf, the one who always seemed to be looking past the camera, towards something no one else could see. Was he an explorer? Eli had once asked. Laura smiled without answering. There were questions she had learned to step around. Daniel Harper had been a dreamer, a man who loved the idea of building things more than the comfort of keeping them. When he left 8 years ago, he took with him the noise of ambition, leaving behind the quiet. That morning began like all others. Laura prepared breakfast, packed Eli's lunch, and walked him to school beneath a gray, sea-wet sky. It was only when she returned home that she noticed the envelope resting against her door, a white rectangle of paper, glinting faintly with a golden seal in the corner. Her name was printed in blue ink: Laura Harper. For a moment she thought it was another bill. But when she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. The letter came from a law firm in a mountain county she barely remembered: Sierra Ridge Estate Management. The words were formal, detached, yet they struck her with quiet force. "We regret to inform you of the passing of Mr. Daniel Harper." The room seemed to shrink around her. She read the line again, unable to absorb its simplicity. Daniel was dead. The letter continued, explaining that according to his final will, she and their son had inherited a property, a house built within a mountain formation in the Sierra Ridge district. The description sounded more like an enigma than real estate. At the bottom, in handwriting she hadn't seen in almost a decade, were a few uneven words. "If you're reading this, it means I finished what I started. The house will tell you why." Laura sat for a long while, staring at the page. Grief was not the right word for what she felt. The man had been gone from her life for years. Yet the finality of death, so definite, so absolute, brought an unexpected ache. She folded the letter, placed it on the table, and made herself tea, but her hands trembled too much to lift the cup. When Eli came home that afternoon, she told him gently. He listened in silence, then asked, "Can we go see it?" "See what?" "The house he built." She tried to laugh, but the sound faltered. "It's far away, Eli. Up in the mountains. We don't even know what it looks like." "Maybe he wanted us to." The boy's voice was quiet but sure, as if the decision had already been made somewhere deep inside him. That night, while Eli slept, Laura reread the letter. The name of the place. Sierra Ridge felt like an echo from another life. She remembered Daniel's obsession with the idea of a self-sustaining house, a living structure, as he'd called it during the last year of their marriage. He had spoken of fusing architecture and nature, of walls that could breathe, of foundations carved from bedrock. She had dismissed it as one more of his impractical passions, yet here it was, real enough to inherit. The next morning she called the law office. A polite voice confirmed the details. Daniel Harper had passed away in the mountains, cause of death undetermined. The house was registered solely to his name, now legally hers and Eli's. There are instructions for access, the clerk added. The property isn't reachable by car. You'll have to go the last few miles on foot. There's a path. You'll know it when you see it. 3 days later, Laura packed the car. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. There was no one to tell. A few clothes, sturdy shoes, a thermos, her son's drawings, and the letter that was all. As they drove away, the ocean disappeared behind them, replaced by hills, then forest. The radio lost its signal before noon. By dusk, the road had narrowed to a single lane climbing into fog. "Are we there yet?" Eli asked for the third time. "Almost," she said, though she wasn't sure. The navigation screen had gone blank an hour ago. They stopped at the last gas station before the ascent, a lonely building with a flickering sign. The attendant, an elderly man with skin like worn leather, peered at her through the window. "You heading up Ridge Road?" "Yes," Laura replied, "to a property called Harper Point." The man frowned. "You mean that place in the rock? Haven't heard anyone go up there in years. They say the mountain took him." She forced a smile. "We're just visiting." He nodded slowly, as if she had spoken in riddles. "Well, the road's washed out past the 3rd mile. After that, you'll have to walk." The last stretch was steep and rough. Mud splashed against the tires, until the car refused to climb farther. They parked by an old wooden marker half swallowed by moss. Hollow Point Trail. Private. The rain had lightened to mist. "Guess this is it," Laura murmured. She helped Eli with his backpack, and they began the climb. The trail twisted through a dense pine forest, the air growing colder with each step. The silence was almost absolute. No birds, no wind, just the muffled sound of their boots on wet soil. Eli pointed to a flat stone half buried by roots. Words had been carved into its surface, barely visible beneath the moss. Those who listen to silence will find what others lose. He looked up at her. "Did Dad write that?" "I don't know," she said, but something in her chest tightened. After nearly 2 hours, the trees thinned, and a wall of gray stone loomed before them. For a moment, Laura thought it was simply the mountain's face, until she noticed the faint geometry of lines and glass set into the rock. The house appeared as if it had grown from the stone itself. One half was carved directly into the cliff, the other projected outward in a blend of metal, glass, and weathered concrete. It was neither ruin nor home, something between creation and memory. Eli whispered, "It's like the mountain built it." They climbed the final slope. The front door was of dark wood, smooth, no handle visible. Yet when Laura pressed her hand against it, the door gave way with a soft sigh, as though recognizing her touch. Inside was cool and dim. The air smelled of minerals and cedar. The light from the doorway fell across a wide room with stone floors and walls that curved seamlessly into the mountain. Furniture stood where it had always been. Chairs, a table, a shelf of books. Everything was clean, preserved, untouched by dust. It felt, absurdly, as if Daniel had just stepped out and would return any moment. Laura set down her bag, feeling her pulse echo in the quiet. On the table lay another envelope, this one plain, unsealed. She opened it with unsteady fingers. Inside was a single line, written in Daniel's unmistakable hand. "Welcome home. Don't look for answers tonight. Just stay." For a long time she stood there, unable to move. The house was utterly still, yet not lifeless. Somewhere deep within the walls she could hear a low hum, almost like breathing. Eli wandered ahead, his small footsteps amplified by the stone. "Mom," he called softly. "It feels alive in here." She managed a faint smile. "Maybe it is." They found a bedroom furnished simply but comfortably. Laura lit a candle from her pack, and the flame reflected off the rock walls like amber glass. Outside, the mist thickened, wrapping the mountain in silence. As she lay beside her son that night, listening to the faint hum of the house, Laura realized she wasn't afraid. The loneliness she had carried for years had shifted, taking a new shape: curiosity. For the first time since Daniel had left, she felt as though she was standing at the beginning of something rather than the end. The sound of the rain softened into steady rhythm, blending with the heartbeat of the mountain. Somewhere below them, unseen, the house waited, alive, patient, holding the secrets of the man she had once loved. And as sleep drew her under, she could almost hear his voice in the quiet. "You'll understand when the mountain breathes." Morning came softly through the mist that curled around the mountain. The rain had stopped, but the air still held the chill of the night before. Laura woke to the faint echo of dripping water and the distant sound of wind moving through unseen cracks in the rock. The house was silent except for those small, natural noises, yet even that quiet seemed to pulse, as if the place itself had a heartbeat. Eli was still asleep beside her, curled into the blanket like a cat, his hair tangled and cheeks flushed from the cold. For a while she watched him, feeling both protective and strangely peaceful. The unease of their arrival had settled into something calmer. Whatever this house was, it didn't feel hostile. It felt aware. When they stepped into the main room, the dim light revealed more details. The walls were not simply stone, but polished surfaces that caught the morning light in veins of quartz and mica. A wide window overlooked the valley below, and through it, Laura could see clouds drifting slowly beneath them. The house seemed to stand above the world. On one side was a kitchen functional, modern, but designed with the same sense of permanence as the rock itself. The shelves were neat, the counters dustless. Daniel had left everything in order. She found a small generator humming faintly behind a panel, its soft vibration spreading through the floor. Eli explored with a mix of caution and excitement. He opened cupboards, peeked behind curtains, touched the walls as if expecting them to respond. "It's like a cave that learned to live," he said, his voice echoing lightly. Laura smiled despite herself. That was something Daniel would have said. She remembered how he used to describe buildings as organisms of stone, how he believed architecture could evolve. Back then, she had rolled her eyes, calling it poetic nonsense. Now she wasn't so sure. Near the far wall stood a desk covered with papers. Most were sketches, blueprints of structures she didn't understand, geometric diagrams that combined the precision of engineering with something almost spiritual. In the margins, Daniel had written phrases: "Energy flows, the mountain knows, the heart of the house is underfoot." There were notebooks, too, filled with his handwriting, dense and looping. The first page she opened read, "Each stone carries a rhythm. If you listen long enough, it will show you how to build without breaking its song." Laura closed the notebook slowly. It was exactly the kind of cryptic thing he used to say when they were married, a language of symbols she had never learned to speak. Yet now, surrounded by the work he had left behind, she could sense that those words weren't metaphor. He had meant them literally. As she explored further, she noticed something strange. The temperature inside the house remained constant, neither cold nor warm, regardless of how close she stood to the mountain wall. There were no visible heaters, no vents, yet the air felt balanced. The generator's hum blended with the faint, rhythmic vibration in the floor. When she pressed her palm against the wall, she felt an almost imperceptible throb beneath her hand. "Mom," Eli called from the corner. "Listen." He stood near a narrow corridor that disappeared into the rock behind a wooden door. His ear was pressed to the surface. "It's breathing," he whispered. Laura joined him, At first, she heard only the silence of stone, but then a low, slow pulse, like air moving through lungs. She stepped back. "It's probably the wind," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. That night, after dinner made on a small camping stove, Laura sat by the window, watching fog roll across the valley. Eli was drawing at the table, sketching what he called the heart of the house, a series of tunnels and chambers that looked both like roots and veins. She noticed how easily he adapted to this place. He didn't seem afraid. If anything, he felt connected to it. Children accepted mysteries in ways adults forgot. When she finally went to bed, she couldn't sleep. The hum in the walls grew louder after midnight. Sometimes it faded to near silence, then swelled again in a slow rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She lay there, eyes open, remembering the last time she had seen Daniel. He had come to say goodbye, though he never said the word. He had spoken instead about vision and purpose, about building something that would outlast sorrow. She had dismissed him then, calling it another one of his escapes. Now, lying in the house he had built, she wondered if he had been telling her the truth. A sound woke her sometime before dawn, soft footsteps, quick and light. She sat up, alarmed, and found Eli standing in the doorway holding a flashlight. His expression was calm, not frightened. "I heard it again," he said. The breathing. She followed him down the corridor to the same wooden door they had seen earlier. It was slightly ajar. The air beyond was cooler, damp, carrying the mineral scent of deep stone. She hesitated, then pushed the door open. A narrow tunnel stretched forward, the light from the flashlight catching wet walls that glittered faintly. The passage sloped downward, and the hum grew clearer, steady, alive. "Stay close," she said, her voice echoing. They moved slowly, their footsteps soft against the rock. The tunnel curved once, then widened into a circular chamber. In the center, a natural spring bubbled up from a fissure in the floor, the water clear and glowing faintly in the flashlight's beam. Around it, the stone walls were etched with carvings. Spirals, geometric shapes, and what looked like mathematical notations. On a small ledge nearby rested a camera and a tin box labeled, "For Eli." Laura's hands shook as she picked up the box. Inside was a flash drive and a note. "If you found this, the house has accepted you. Watch the recording together." Back in the main room, she connected the drive to the laptop they had brought for the trip. The screen flickered to life. Daniel appeared, sitting in that same underground chamber. He looked thinner, older, but his eyes were steady. The image of the spring shimmered behind him. "If you're seeing this," he began, "then the house is finished, and so, I suppose, am I. I didn't build it to hide from the world, Laura. I built it to give something back to it. Beneath this mountain runs a vein of clean, renewable water, a source older than any map. The world will need it someday, but the world wouldn't listen if I tried to tell them. So I built a place that could protect it, regulate it, and, if you choose, share it." He paused, coughing lightly, then smiled faintly. "I was sick when I started. You probably know that by now. The doctors gave me time, but I needed purpose more than I needed time. Eli, if you're watching this, this is yours now. Not just the house, but what it stands for. It's alive because it's connected. Every part of it speaks to another. You'll understand when you listen." He lifted a small stone from the floor and dropped it into the spring. The ripples spread, glowing briefly before fading. "Nothing we build lasts forever," he said. "But sometimes, if we build it right, it learns to live without us." The video ended abruptly. The screen went dark. For a moment, neither Laura nor Eli spoke. The only sound was the steady hum in the walls. Eli turned to her, his eyes wide. "He wasn't crazy," he said softly. Laura felt tears sting her eyes. "No," she whispered. He wasn't. That night, they returned to the underground chamber with candles. The spring's light seemed stronger now, reflecting against the stone in soft waves. Laura knelt beside it and touched the water. It was warm, impossibly so, and when she drew her hand back, her fingers shimmered, as though dusted with light. Eli dipped his hand too, laughing softly at the sensation. For the first time since she'd received the letter, Laura felt something other than grief or confusion. She felt wonder. The house was not just a monument to Daniel's obsession, it was proof of his belief that life could grow from even the hardest stone. As they climbed back to the surface, she looked around at the carved walls, the passages that seemed to breathe with them. The structure pulsed faintly under her feet, the heartbeat of a creation that refused to die. She thought of Daniel's last words. "You'll understand when you listen." Outside, the mist had thinned. From the window, she could see the valley stretching into shadow, the sky painted with the pale gray of dawn. She stood there for a long time, the hum of the house resonating in her bones, her hand resting gently against the stone. The mountain did breathe. She could feel it now. And for the first time in years, so did she, the morning after the discovery of the underground chamber was brighter than any since they had arrived. The mountain air felt clean, the light sharpened by mist still clinging to the cliffs. Laura opened her eyes to silence, the kind of silence that no longer felt empty, but full, like the space between heartbeats. Eli was already awake, sitting near the window, sketching. His drawing showed the spring they had found, the glowing water and the curves of the chamber, but he had added something she hadn't seen. Faint lines rising from the source, threads reaching up through the rock, connecting every part of the house. When she looked closer, she realized the lines formed the faint outline of a man. "It's Dad," he said simply. "He's still here." Laura didn't correct him. She didn't know what to call what they had found, or what to feel. The image of Daniel on the screen, frail and determined, haunted her thoughts. He had known he was dying, and yet he had kept building, as if the mountain could preserve what his body could not. All her anger toward him, years of it had begun to lose its edge. For so long, she had seen his leaving as an act of abandonment. Now she wondered if it had been an act of love, clumsy but sincere, a man's attempt to leave something behind for those he couldn't save with presence alone. After breakfast, Laura walked through the house slowly, touching each wall as if to remind herself it was real. Every surface seemed to respond with warmth under her palm. She went to the desk, where the notebook still lay open, and began to read. The first pages were technical sketches of filtration systems, designs for sustainable turbines. But as she turned the pages, Daniel's writing became less mechanical and more personal. A house is an extension of the heart. If the heart stops, the walls collapse. The key is rhythm. Another entry read, "She said I was running from them. Maybe I was. But one can't build something this fragile while being watched by those who measure everything in profit." And later, "The boy deserves better than noise and concrete. He deserves a place that listens back." She closed the journal, feeling tears well in her eyes. The boy, Eli. Daniel had built all this, perhaps knowing that Eli would one day return here. Laura looked at the faint flicker of dust in the sunlight, at how the air shimmered like breath. "He built it for you," she murmured. That afternoon, clouds gathered again. The wind picked up around the cliffs, moaning through the cracks in the stone. Laura busied herself sealing the windows with cloth, while Eli read more of his father's journals by the fire. The generator's hum blended with the rising sound of the storm, until it seemed the entire mountain vibrated with energy. When she checked the clock, it was past 7, and the first drops of rain were already striking the glass. They ate in silence, the storm intensifying outside. At some point, the lights flickered, dimmed, then steadied. "It's okay," Eli said, watching her worried glance. "The house will take care of us." She wanted to smile at his confidence, but the unease that had been absent since yesterday began to creep back. Daniel had planned for storms, but this one felt different, charged with something older and wilder. When they finished eating, Laura walked toward the window and froze. The valley below was swallowed by rain, and along the slope, a wave of earth and trees had begun to shift, crawling downward. A landslide. The path they had climbed days earlier vanished under mud and debris. "The road's gone," she whispered. Eli joined her, pressing his hands against the glass. "Then we'll just stay until it comes back." The storm lasted through the night. The power failed completely, yet the walls glowed faintly with the same light as the spring. Laura realized the house was feeding itself, drawing energy from within the mountain. They gathered blankets and huddled near the fireplace, listening to the rumble outside. The mountain seemed to speak in long, low growls, its voice resonating through the floor. Eli fell asleep against her shoulder, his breathing syncing with the pulse that echoed through the house. Laura closed her eyes and tried to calm her thoughts. For the first time, she was truly cut off from the world. No roads, no signal, no exit. And yet, she didn't feel trapped. In the deepest hour before dawn, she dreamed of Daniel. He was standing in the underground chamber, the spring glowing brighter than before. He looked healthy again, his eyes clear. "You always thought I was trying to disappear," he said softly. "But I was only trying to become quiet enough to hear what mattered." His voice merged with the hum of the water, and she woke with tears on her cheeks. The air was still, the storm finally broken. When morning came, the world outside had changed. The sky was washed clean, blue and sharp against the green of the soaked forest. Steam rose from the ground, and from the cliffs above the house, thin streams of water trickled down into the valley. It took her a moment to realize what she was seeing: the spring's water, carried outward, seeding life where the flood had once been. The mountain itself was bleeding renewal. Later, as they stepped outside for the first time in 2 days, the ground squelched beneath their boots, but the air smelled new. Eli ran ahead, laughing, pointing at the rivulets running beside the path. "It's feeding everything," he said. "The house is alive." Laura followed him slowly, watching the way the light played across the wet stone. She thought of Daniel's words. "Nothing we build lasts forever, but sometimes it learns to live without us." He hadn't been speaking of death, he had been speaking of legacy. Inside, she returned to the notebooks, looking for clues about the systems Daniel had designed. In one of the later entries, he wrote about contingency plans for isolation, how the house could sustain itself indefinitely using geothermal currents and water pressure. But among the calculations was something more cryptic. When rhythm aligns with the heart, the house will answer. The storm is not destruction, but proof. She read it aloud without fully understanding, yet the words gave her a sense of calm. Perhaps the storm had been necessary, part of the design. As days passed, they adapted to the quiet routine of the mountain. Laura cooked simple meals from the supplies they had brought. Eli spent hours drawing or exploring. At times she felt Daniel's presence everywhere, his handwriting, his tools, the hum in the walls. She began recording her own notes, part diary, part conversation with him. Each entry started the same way. "You built a home that breathes, Daniel. I'm still learning how to listen." Then, one evening, as she was writing by candlelight, she heard footsteps outside. The sound was faint but deliberate, too rhythmic to be the wind. She stood, heart pounding, and went to the door. The handle turned easily under her hand, But when she opened it, no one was there. The rain had started again, light this time, and the ground was covered with fresh footprints, one set leading from the trees, stopping at the porch, and then vanishing. She called Eli's name, but he was asleep upstairs. The chill that ran through her was not fear, but recognition. She whispered into the mist, "If you're still here, show me." That night, unable to sleep, she sat by the fire. Around midnight, the hum in the walls shifted, no longer steady but rising and falling like breath caught in emotion. She followed the sound down the corridor toward the underground door. When she opened it, the tunnel was dimly lit by the spring below, which now glowed with a golden hue. The water was calmer than before, the surface glassy. On the stone beside it lay a folded piece of paper, dry despite the humidity. Her name was written across it in Daniel's unmistakable hand. She opened it slowly. "You once said I couldn't love two things at once, the living and the dream. You were right. I couldn't then. But this house is both. It's everything I couldn't give you in person. If you ever find this, it means you stayed. And if you stayed, it means you heard what I heard. That love isn't in the leaving or the staying, but in what we choose to build from the silence." Laura pressed the paper to her chest, her tears falling onto the stone. She felt the faint warmth beneath her knees, the same warmth that pulsed through the house. For the first time, she whispered, "I forgive you." The words echoed faintly in the chamber, and the water shimmered as if responding. When she returned to the main room, dawn was just beginning to creep over the valley. Eli stirred in his sleep, but did not wake. The hum of the house had softened again, no longer mournful, but peaceful. Outside, the landslide path had already begun to sprout small patches of green ferns, moss, the first flowers of recovery. She stood by the window and realized that what Daniel had created was not a retreat from the world, but a bridge back to it. The mountain wasn't a monument to his solitude. It was an offering. As the sun rose, its light poured into the room, illuminating every corner of the stone walls. The air inside shimmered gently, alive with quiet motion. The house had endured the storm and proven its purpose. Laura exhaled, her breath merging with the mountain's rhythm, steady and sure. She no longer felt like a visitor or a widow. She felt like a part of the living system Daniel had imagined, a continuation of something larger than grief. Outside, Eli's laughter echoed through the open door as he ran into the bright morning, the sound carried by the valley winds. The house seemed to breathe with him, in and out, patient and strong. Laura followed, closing the door behind her, and for the first time, she did not look back. The mountain held its silence, but now she knew it was listening. The days that followed carried a calm, unlike any Laura had ever known. The storm had cleansed not only the valley, but something within her, washing away the lingering shadows of resentment and confusion. The mountain had changed color after the rain. The rock seemed deeper, richer, breathing faint hues of green and silver beneath the light. She spent her mornings tending to small tasks, sweeping dust from corners, recording Daniel's notes, boiling water from the spring for tea, while Eli explored the slopes and traced the paths of tiny streams that now wove down the hill like veins of glass. The world felt rebuilt, fragile but alive. When she looked at Eli, she sometimes saw Daniel's posture, that same quiet attentiveness, as if he were listening to things beyond the reach of human sound. The boy had grown surer of himself here. His restlessness was replaced by a patience that surprised her. He no longer asked when they would return to the city. Once, while they sat together on the porch, he said, "If we go back, the house will get lonely. It made her smile, not because she believed in ghosts, but because she knew now that Daniel had built this place as something more than a home. It was a living promise, meant to hold them until they could understand. She found a new rhythm in writing. Using one of Daniel's notebooks, she began a record of everything. The engineering marvel of the house, the strange warmth of the walls, the flow of light at certain hours, even her dreams. The first pages were factual, but soon her words shifted, growing more personal. He thought he was running away from love, but maybe love was the only thing that kept him building. The act of writing turned the silence into dialogue. She often imagined Daniel sitting opposite her, nodding slightly, as he used to when he was deep in thought. Sometimes she caught herself speaking aloud. The house never answered, and yet she never felt unheard. By early summer, travelers began to appear. Hikers who had lost their way, a pair of young geologists mapping water sources, even an old couple who said they remembered stories about a man who built himself into a rock. Laura welcomed them without hesitation. The house, self-sufficient as it was, could spare warmth and food. Guests would marvel at its architecture, the impossible quiet, the pure water from the spring. Some stayed for an evening, others for weeks. And though none of them knew the full story, every visitor left with the same strange expression of calm, as if something in the air had rearranged their sense of time. It was during one of those visits that an idea began to take shape. Laura was sharing tea with a university researcher named Miriam, who kept asking about Daniel's filtration designs. "This place is a model for sustainable living," Miriam said. "If people saw what's possible here, they'd think differently about isolation, about harmony." That night, Laura wrote for hours. The next morning, she called the project what it had always meant to be: the Harper Refuge, a space for learning, rebuilding, and remembering. Within weeks, the idea grew roots. The hikers and scientists who passed through promised to return. Miriam offered to bring students from her environmental engineering program. Local townspeople, once curious from afar, began to help clear the old path up the ridge. Even the skeptical voices, the ones who whispered that the mountain should remain untouched, fell quiet after visiting the house. They left with eyes softened by wonder. It was as if the mountain itself chose who to accept. Eli adapted to this transformation naturally. He became the guide for newcomers, showing them the underground chamber, telling them about the spring in his father's words. It listens before it gives. People smiled at his seriousness, not realizing how much truth he carried. Laura often watched him from a distance, remembering how small he had seemed when they first climbed that trail. Now he moved with confidence, speaking about energy flow and soil health, as though the mountain had educated him personally. In him, she saw continuity, not the burden of inheritance, but the quiet strength of belonging. One afternoon, while organizing the storage alcove near Daniel's desk, Eli called her over. He had found a small wooden box hidden behind a loose panel. Inside was a sealed envelope marked in Daniel's handwriting. "For my son." Laura hesitated before handing it to him. "It's yours," she said. "He meant it for you." The boy sat at the desk and opened it carefully. The letter inside was short, written in firm, fading ink. "Eli," it began. "I built this house because I was afraid of time. I wanted to make something that wouldn't disappear, like everything else I touched. But you're the proof that time doesn't destroy what's real, it carries it forward. Don't let the silence frighten you. It's not emptiness, it's space for what comes next. Remember, the mountain listens best when you speak with kindness. Love, Dad." When he finished reading, Eli looked up with wet eyes and said nothing. Laura wrapped her arms around him, feeling his heartbeat against her own. For the first time, there was no grief in the silence, only completion. Daniel's absence had turned into presence, not through haunting, but through understanding. As summer deepened, the Harper refugee began to take its true form. The house became both sanctuary and school. Scholars arrived with notebooks and cameras. Locals brought tools and lumber to repair the trail. Children from the nearby valley painted signs and planted saplings along the slope. Laura coordinated everything with patient energy. Each day, she woke before dawn to prepare food and check the systems Daniel had designed. Every night, she fell asleep to the same steady hum in the walls, comforted by its rhythm. It was the sound of continuity, the heartbeat of stone and memory combined. One evening, as the last rays of sun turned the sky copper, a familiar figure appeared at the gate. It was Miriam again, carrying a small metal plaque. "For the entrance," she said. Laura took it in her hands and read the inscription. "The Eleanor Harper Learning Center, for those who build with conscience." She smiled at the name. "He'd like that," she said quietly. The plaque was fixed beside the door the next morning, and when the first visitors came, they touched it as though it were a blessing. Autumn arrived with golden leaves and crisp air. The valley below had changed since their arrival. The streams from the spring had spread, feeding the soil. Grass grew where bare rock once showed. Even the wildlife returned. Deer along the ridges, birds nesting near the cliffs. Nature itself seemed to approve. Laura spent long evenings on the porch, watching the seasons tilt. Sometimes she spoke softly into the wind, not as prayer, but as gratitude. "You were right," she would say. "You didn't build a monument, you built a beginning." Eli grew taller that year, his hands rough from work, his eyes bright with ideas. He wanted to expand the refuge, to design small shelters in the same style as his father's architecture. Structures that could breathe, that wouldn't scar the earth. He sketched constantly, filling pages with designs that blended science and poetry. Laura never discouraged him. She knew now that what Daniel had left behind wasn't just stone and water. It was a way of seeing a lesson in listening. One winter morning, as frost shimmered on the windows, Laura found another envelope. It was tucked inside a drawer in Daniel's old desk, yellowed with age. On it, in a trembling hand, were the words, "For whoever continues." Inside was a simple note. "Do not close the door when the wind comes. Let it enter. The mountain only speaks to those who answer." She placed it back in the drawer, smiling through tears. That afternoon, she left the front door open for hours, letting the cold wind sweep through the rooms. The house seemed to hum in response, as if greeting an old friend. Years later, when travelers came, they would still find Laura there, older, silver-haired, her movements slower, but her eyes bright. They would hear her speak of Daniel not as a ghost, but as part of the mountain's living memory. She would tell them about the day she and her son arrived, how the path had disappeared, how fear had turned into discovery. And she would end her story the same way each time. He thought he built this place to survive himself, but he built it so that life could keep moving long after we're gone. In the quiet evenings, when the visitors left and Eli worked late on his models, Laura would sit alone by the fire. The house, as always, breathed gently around her. On the mantel were photographs, Daniel in his youth, Eli at the spring, the valley now lush and green. Beside them stood the small plaque Miriam had made. The light from the fire flickered over the words, making them shimmer as if alive. She listened to the hum in the walls, the low murmur of water running far below, and whispered, "You were never really gone, were you?" Outside, the sky darkened to indigo. The mountain loomed vast and calm, its silent ridges etched against the stars. The wind swept softly across the valley, carrying with it the scent of pine and stone. Within the house, warmth lingered like memory. Laura closed her eyes, her thoughts quiet and sure. The mountain breathed, and she breathed with it, steady, eternal, at peace. The legacy had taken root, and in that harmony of stone, water, and human will, the house lived on, not as a monument to the dead, but as a testament to the living who had learned, at last, to listen. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch the next video or explore others on the channel, and share this one with someone who loves a good story. Your support helps keep new stories coming.